Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Warlord Games official podcast. My name is Brad, and I'm the host. And joining me this evening is a man who has been very busy of late because he is the author of Warlord's newest, hottest game. A man who absolutely loves naval historical battles and has been part of a lot of really exciting projects that we are going to talk a little bit about to start with before we get into the Napoleonic waters of Black Seas. Now, of course, before we do that, we need to talk to the author himself. Gabrio, welcome to the Warlord Games official podcast. How are you today?
Thank you very much. I'm very well.
Oh, now, of course, I mentioned that you are a lover of naval games. Now, you have been a part of quite a few games in the past in helping develop them and playtest them. Is that right? But this is your first truly solo effort.
That is correct, yes.
Nice. So, where did you start?
So, yes, my first venture into the world of naval wargaming was together with Mark Latham back in my days when I used to work in Games Workshop on a project from what was then the Warhammer Ancients on a book called Trafalgar.
That's right.
I was one of the main helpers of Mark and main playtesters. There's also my photo in prime space in the book, if anybody has a book going that far. So I helped there quite a lot. I helped Mark, who is also a friend still to this day. Furthermore, I then ventured on my own on a project helping with a board game called Pirates of Nassau, completely different from naval wargaming. It was more of a Euro-style board game where I helped the main author, Richard Glazer. And lastly, I was one of the three main authors in Cruel Seas, the head author being John Stallard, who is in charge of the CEO of Warlord Games. But me and Richard Carlisle helped quite significantly, helped him in writing the book, especially with the mechanics, where he was the main, obviously, contributor and the main person in charge. But me first, and then Richard came on following that, came up with and helped develop a lot of the mechanics.
Now, I've read in an interview that in the past when John first approached you about the World War II game that you said, yeah, that's great, but I would really love to get into do a Napoleonic naval game. And it sounds like that he's letting you do that.
That's right. Yeah, it was just before I joined Warlord Games, about between 7 and 9 years ago. The memory at my age is kind of a little bit fuzzy. And where we sat down at the John Borlase pub, which is an oddly Napoleonic maritime themed pub. Not far from Warlord Games headquarters, where we were just over a pint discussing the merits of naval wargaming, both in World War II, specifically with motor torpedo boats, and which is John's passion.
Oh yeah,
and I said, well, my absolute passion, and it's always been like that, is to Napoleonic Age of Sail wargaming. All Age of Sail specific in general, however, specifically the Napoleonic one is where I think the main action is at, and it's when sailing was at its best.
Yes.
And the art of sailing warfare was at its best. After that, you have the introduction of metal hulls and steam as main method of propulsion, and therefore things significantly changed the kind of style of naval combat that was going on.
That's right.
So that really difficult balance of commanding hundreds of men trying to sail a big square rigged ship, balancing that with having to, shoot cannons and aim at the enemy and trying to sink or make him surrender was an art at that time. In my opinion, it's, although obviously quite romanticized, it's
yes, you're a fan. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
There is nothing better than that
exactly.
in my book. So that's why I've been trying to get involved into such period and wargame in general. And it's almost a dream come true that after so many years of us having an idea, both John realized his dream of bringing out a motor torpedo boat game in World War II, and now very well practically is out now is the Napoleonic sailing war game, Black Seas.
Now, I'm glad that you have, and I'm also glad having what I've seen of the game and the gameplay that I've heard of, people who've enjoyed it. What's often intimidating with black sail games or with big sail games is it turns into almost a military simulation. Like, it can be really intimidating once you take into account wind and sails. And I mean, you've seen all the pirate movies, or we all have, where there's all of these complex tactics using the wind and the sea and getting around things, and to simulate that on the tabletop can be quite difficult. But you've actually been able to distill this game down into sort of Warlord's philosophy of having a fun, a game that you can relatively easily pick up, but has depth that you keep wanting to pick it up. So you have a basic set of rules for people to play, but then you also have advanced rules to add some of that complexity in. Most notably, I've heard you talk at length about the influence that the wind has on the ships in this time period.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of my helpers, which have been invaluable. I've had two main helpers in. Well, I had many actually, but specifically in regards to the rules, there were actually three people who helped considerably. One of which mentioned that it's like a toolbox, this rule book. So you have your basics rules, and then you have a toolbox of add-ons that you can bolt on if you want to, adding complexity as you go along. The main one being how you treat the wind. The core rules see the wind being treated in a very abstract and completely unrealistic way, which specifically, if you don't mind me going a little bit into detail,
please.
And it's a little bit hard to describe without imagery alongside, but I'll try and do my best. You have to imagine the big ships had three main masts with square rigged, so there were big square-like sheets of sails. And if the wind was directly behind the ship, blowing directly behind the ship, the wind would hit the rear mast sails, the big square, would fill all of them up, but obviously that would take away from the two masts in front of that.
Okay, yeah.
So the fastest the ship could sail was not actually when the wind was directly behind it, but it was instead when the wind was behind it, but to either side of it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
From behind, but to the side as well, and therefore that would allow the wind to fill all three big masts. All sails belonging to all three of the masts at the same time, and therefore propel the ship at the fastest possible speed. Now, so this is one of the main abstraction of the core rules. Instead of doing this, just for ease of interpretation and ease of because it's very if you don't know this about the sailing square rigged ships, then instinctively thinking that if the ship comes behind me, then that's when I go at the fastest.
Right.
So that's what I made it so in the main in the core rules, just for simplicity, instead of trying to add a lot of needing to check and adding complexity. Furthermore, in playtesting, it became very obvious that sailing, what is called trimming the wind, which is basically sailing very close to where the wind is coming against you. Obviously, a ship cannot sail directly into the wind.
No, you go backwards, yeah.
However, if you angled your sail in a certain way, you could sail almost against the wind by going at an angle towards it and then doing a maneuver called tacking, which is swinging across and going the other way. So kind of zigzagging into the wind. So the angle at which you can trim the wind, as in going against the wind, in the core rules, in the simplified rules, is a lot more extreme than what it is physically possible.
Got it.
This is because in playtesting, we found that by doing it the more realistic way, a lot of ships would go to the end of the movement and it would be almost impossible for them to go back if the wind was going against them, and therefore you'd kind of lock them out of the game. Okay. So by making this angle a lot more acute, I've allowed a certain degree of abstraction and, if you want, less accuracy or less physically possible scenario. However, it's a lot more fun because you can actually go back into the fray, even if the wind is against you, in an easier way. So it is basically a balance that I have tried to struck between having something that still feels as if is authentic, because you cannot sail into the wind directly.
No.
So it still feels as if there's a restriction there based on the wind. But it is abstracted and allows you, in my opinion, to have more fun, because you're turning the ship around, because we all want to do is just shoot the cannons as soon as possible, and being involved with the complexity of what the real with the reality of sailing maybe is not for everybody's interest. However, there is in the advanced rules a section, a simple substitution of a diagram that tells you if a ship is going against the wind or not, which has a much more realistic way, both in terms of the angle at which you can trim the wind and in terms of where the wind comes from behind, that determines the maximum speed you can go. So by substituting simply the diagram that you have in the core rule with the diagram that is in the advanced rules, you can add a lot of complexity and make the game itself a lot more realistic. So it's up to you, really, what you want to do. And this is the main bit that is the main bolt-on that before playing a game you'd have to decide with your opponent, shall we make it more or less complex, however you want to do it. On top of that, there is a lot of other advanced rules that can complicate, but also theme quite significantly the game. I think the most important ones is the special Navy rules. So you can play more of what I would call a tournament style game in which you can theme your ships, i.e. play British against French, for example, because they have flags on. However, the stats are exactly the same. Okay. So there is no difference between the French and the British ships. It's all about your mastery of the seas, of the movement, of positioning your ship in the right way in order to obtain the maximum damage and the best result. However, if you want to theme your games and make them more interesting in a way, you can add the special Navy rules, which also somewhat unbalanced the game. I have attempted to make them as balanced as possible, but in the naval Napoleonic era, it is without a doubt that the British had the better tactics and the better training, and therefore they were just better. I'm sure. I think that I don't know the exact minutes that it took the British to reload a cannon, which was really important for the rate of fire that a ship could achieve. But I think it's the region of roughly 1 minute, and I'm sure that more expert than me will be able to correct the exact. But it was more like a minute to reload for the British versus 2.5, sometimes even 3 minutes for the other navies.
Wow, that's
with the exception of it's a big difference, yeah. So you can imagine that if in a battle that lasts half an hour, how many more shots the British could pull off in respect to their opponents is significant. And now, interestingly, the U.S. Navy were also very good at doing this, and they also trained, so they have an advantage as well, with the distinction that they cannot have bigger ships because during those times they only had super frigates as their biggest ships.
Yeah.
So they are good at shooting like the British, but they cannot have those really big ships.
Yeah.
That do make a difference in the game. Now, those are the rules that actually make it more characterful, but also add a little bit of lack of balance, you could say. So again, but it's another bolt-on that you might want to add on.
Exactly. So you're adding the depth that you want as the player, but the rules themselves allow you to pick it up and play quite easily, especially when you're learning the game. It's not one of those games that it's an intimidating pickup.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then just to finish off on the advanced rule, there's a lot more. There's a lot more rules to some quite small in terms of the amount of change they're doing, some significant that add levels of complexity. There are several in the advanced rules, and as I previously said, the term toolbox I think is a good descriptor, that you can just pick and choose which ones you want and you like to use and apply them. These include firing out of sequence. So with the rule fire as she bears for both the attacker and the defender, terrain and weather, sailing in lines, which was one of the main tactics of the time, and I wanted to represent it in a rule that would be to some advantage if you do sail in lines. So I believe that you can have great fun just playing the main game, but add in what you want to the main game to make it a little bit more exciting and a little bit more complex. Is a key. It's a feature of the entire system.
Fantastic. Yeah. You've actually answered a lot of my questions about how the whole system works just by the way that you've talked through it. Now, this does share some of the mechanics of Cruel Seas, but it definitely goes its own way in that, like Cruel Seas, there are wake templates that happen behind the ships, and the way that ships maneuver is fairly similar. Is that correct?
That is correct. The wakes and several other aspects of the game are almost a campaign of mine of trying to get gaming pieces to not only be there as a representation of a rule that you have to apply, but also that add to the overall look of the battle top of the landscape or seascape, if you want, that is in front of you. So the wakes are a very good example of this. you could use several other systems to determine if a ship is going at a full speed, or you could just put a token behind it, or a dice, or there's a million and one way to do it. However, none are, in my opinion, as pretty as having a wake behind it.
Agreed.
That marks out not only the speed you're going at, but it also looks really good on the tabletop. The other thing, I've started doing this. The wakes were one of my introduction in Cruel Seas because of this campaign that I wanted to bring ahead. The other aspect is when you've got to mark your ships because of the way that the turn order works. It's in weather gauge order. So the ships might move out of sequence, and you need a way to determine the ones that have moved from the ones that haven't moved.
Right.
So there's two markers if you want to signify this. And if you shot your cannons, you put some white wool next to the broadside or next to the gun you used, which looks really good in if you look at it from afar. It looks great. Some smoke come billowing out of the cannon. It's really evocative. But it also has it's a mark in the ship, which means if it has some smoke, it means you've used it. So until use it till the next turn. And if you haven't shot, there are some markers in the starter set, which are little cardboard punch-out round tokens, which represent seagulls, whales diving into the water. So you put them next to the ship, and they look cool. They add to the overall look of the game, but also they are part of the rules, integral part of the rules. So, and these are just a couple of examples of how I'm trying to make the mechanics or ways for you to mark and remember elements of the rules. Instead of just them being cluttering the table, they actually add to the overall look of the table.
Yeah, you're not kicked out of the aesthetic. There are some game systems which are super token heavy that you'll just look at a tabletop and it's just a mountain of tokens and dice and other things on the tabletop to mark which is doing what. But in this case, you look at the board and it looks like an ocean filled with ships. And I think another really cool aesthetic that I think you were a part of as well in making that sort of the aesthetic of the game look so good is this is the first game that Warlords entirely sculpted all the models for digitally. Everything's been done digitally. But I believe that you were integral in having one little detail added, and that every ship comes with a little tiny bit of thin string for rigging. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. My main job in Warlord Games, because designing games, unfortunately, is not my main job. I'd love it to be, but it isn't. My main job is procurement manager of Warlord Games. So in a way, I was lucky because I was also tasked by myself to source some kind of very specific thread that you need. It's 100% viscose rayon thread you need to rig the ships. And I actually managed to find it at a price that meant that we could add it to every single box that we have in a very useful bobbin format. It's a little bobbin. It's the same one that you usually put inside sewing machines, the little one, the plastic ones, and which means that there is very little excuse for people to have a go at rigging their ships.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people are intimidated by this. However, I think it adds enormously to the look of the ships, and it is a bit fiddly. I have to, be completely honest, but it's by far not impossible. And even, having a go, and if it's not perfect, it still makes the ships look 100 times better.
Yeah, agreed.
And you just will have this special rayon, which usually hasn't got a huge cost, but it's difficult to source. It's not readily available. It's not part of your standard sewing kit because it's not cotton. It's a very special grade of thread. And this is because, by the way, just a little bit of a tangent, because the cotton frays quite a lot. It has microscopic little bits of cotton coming out of the actual thread, which A, make it look very untidy, and B, after a couple of weeks of it standing there without doing anything, it will gather an enormous amount of dust.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they will. Yeah, whilst the viscose rayon does not. It's very sleek and it's a lot harder for the dust to gather on the micro little frays of thread that the cotton has. So that's why it is the way that it's that special thread.
Having seen the ships without the rigging and having seen the ships with the rigging, you are absolutely right. It makes a huge difference, and it's not one that you'd immediately think, oh, the rigging's missing. You would just think it's too small that it for that scale, because it is 1/700 scale that it would be missing. But you're absolutely right. Once you see it on those ships, you kind of expect it and you want it, right?
Yes, absolutely. So the rigging, as you said, is well, I insisted it being there, and I managed to source it, and I'm really happy that we found a source for it. However, if I may just go on a little bit on the ships themselves.
Yes.
Because I was the one who briefed and approved all of the ships. The philosophy behind the way that the ships were designed was to make the Age of Sail wargaming appeal to the wider amount of public possible for a completely personal reason of I wanted more people to play against, because before now it was very, very inaccessible, if you want. The rules were really complicated, and really you need, if you didn't know how to sail, you had a very little chance of managing to do anything. The games took very long to play, and the ships, although beautiful, the ones that were on the market, they are incredibly fiddly and difficult to build. So the philosophy behind the design was to, without compromising on the looks, and I don't think we have, it's to make it as accessible as possible. This is why I absolutely insisted in having the sails in laminated card and printed. Not because of cost, because it's got nothing to do with it. It's more because of the look. One of the more difficult thing to paint on a ship is sails. And the alternatives that were on before were either thick, chunky metal sails, which don't look like sails. No. They have to be really thick. Or brass-edged. When the brass-edged, they look all right. However, both these solutions have got the disadvantage of having to be painted. Yeah. And I don't consider myself a bad painter. I have struggled to make them look really good. And it just took, instead, to print them out. And actually, sorry, before that, Peter Dennis, who is also the main artist for the front cover of the rulebook and the starter set, Peter Dennis, who is a brilliant artist, he actually painted the sails. He painted a couple of versions of the sails, and that's what is actually that we got to print. So you have a beautiful interpretation of the sail, which are already punched out. So you just literally cut them out, bend them so that they look as if they're billowing, stick them on with super glue, and they immediately make the ship look amazing. Yeah, because the sails were a huge part of the visual of a ship. They are big compared to the hull, and it's one of the main thing you see. And the second thing was the rat lines, which are the kind of triangle-y shape ladders that go up the masts. They usually you can find them in brass edged. Brass edged is very expensive. They look amazing in brass edged. Don't get me wrong,
Yes.
but they're very expensive and extremely fiddly. And as soon as you put them in the tabletop, they immediately, if by handling them a bit too much or in the wrong way, they will bend. And once they bend, they lose the paint.
Yes.
More often than not. And it's almost possible for them to get back to being completely straight and looking good. So our alternative was to print them on acetate. You've got to cut them out yourself, but that's quite easy to do. And then you just stick them on. And you cannot see that they're acetate, apart from if you pick up the ship, look at it to within 10 centimeters of your eyes, and kind of turn it around to make the sheen come out from. Because otherwise, if they're on the tabletop,
you can't see it.
A foot or more distance, you will not see any different whatsoever.
Yeah, they look sensational.
The bell, I think the building is not going to burn down, so don't worry.
Okay, I was gonna say, is everything all right? I am
absolutely.
looking. I appreciate, in particular, if you have listened to this show, you do know that I am the token American working for Warlord Games in Australia, no less. But I am from Massachusetts, right near Lexington Green, where the shot that was heard around the world, apparently, which was set off the American Revolution. And so for me, that whole time period is very important. And I can't help but notice, though the box game for Black Sails has the English and the French, I can't help but notice, but one of the first ships that is being sold is my personal favorite and the ship that I have visited more times than any other on the planet, and that is the USS Constitution. And I am just eyeing it up, and the rigging and the sails, it looks just fantastic. And I absolutely love that at 1/700 scale, you can actually read the name on the back of the ship. It is just such a nice scale for detail that just makes this game look sensational on the tabletop.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm Italian, I have to say, and I love Italy with a passion. However, I've grown to love the UK. I really like it here. I've been living here for 22 years. However, I have a secret passion for America and the US in general. I do. I have my bolt action army is Americans. When I was playing and playtesting the Trafalgar book with Mark Latham, I had quite a significantly big American fleet. So I really wanted the Americans to have a role within the system, and the Constitution is out in October, so now. However, there will be a lot more of both super frigates and normal frigates coming out in the box set for the US fleet just before Christmas. So fantastic. You will see the USS President and the USS United States, which were two more of the super frigates, the 44 plus guns, like the USS Constitution. They will be featured in the fleet box, and there will also be the backs for several of the other frigates of the US.
Brilliant.
And later on in 2020, we will also produce a specific model for the USS Essex. So, yeah, absolutely. Although at that time, the Navy of the US was quite fledgling. It was just starting off. And they didn't have any third rates at the time, or I think they had one or two in design that they were thinking of bringing out.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it took the advent of steam and metal hulls to kind of halt the more the sailing part of their fleet investment, and therefore the investment changed into more modern type of ships, which is just the way it is, and it's progress. But still, they feature quite heavily, and although they don't have those bigger ships, the big first rates, 100+ guns, and the third rates, they still have a really important place within the system, with opportunity of doing lake battles. There is one of the special characters, for example, in the rules. His special rules is only applicable when playing on, or when you agree that you're playing on a U.S. lake. Oliver Hazard Perry, who was nicknamed the hero of Lake Erie because he led a very decisive victory against the Royal Navy on Lake Erie. So it's really inviting the players to just explore different kind of scenarios and different kind of settings, even if they're not the traditional, oceanic kind of settings.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Furthermore, although they did not really have third rates, they did have designs in play, and they might have some third rate going that was started to be built. This is, don't quote me on this, because this is where my knowledge goes a little bit fuzzy. However, in the box of plastic third rates, we have also introduced the flags for the US, so that if you want to play what-if scenarios, as in, well, what if the US did have a third rate in time ready, then you can do that if you want. So
nice.
It's absolutely available.
Well, the U.S. are sort of the fourth nation included, and I did jump on that. I did sort of jump the gun. Sorry about that. But there are three other sort of main nations that the game sort of encompasses. Clearly, I did mention the United States. Britain and France, but we also have Spain. Now, those are the three sort of major, I don't want to say races, but the three major
factions.
Yes.
Faction or nations. Yeah, those three were the nation that had the biggest fleets of the time. So they all had to feature. Interestingly, the fourth biggest navy of the time was actually the Russian Navy, which is not featured in the book, not for any specific reason. It's they did have some role, they participated here and there, helped out. They had several small battles. However, they did not participate with big fleet engagement during the Napoleonic times.
Got it.
Of any significance. Obviously there were some, but not of any significance. So that's why they were left out. Not to say that they might not feature in a future PDF for special rules for them. They had different navies which were more targeted for different kind of battles with ships that had slightly lower mass, to cater for the much more intense winds of the Baltic, and the kind of the coastal type of warfare, naval warfare that they were involved with. As I said, not to say that they weren't involved in any battles, because they were. They absolutely were. There is a brief mention in the book about several of the battles they participated. So if you want to theme your ships more towards the Russians, you can.
Nice.
You'll have to choose your own flags, unfortunately. However, the ships were mostly they looked at that scale quite similar. So you can definitely use the plastic ones.
Fantastic.
Furthermore, the other main fleets, but then you're going into quite small fleets by the time, although people think of them as big fleets. The by the Napoleonic times they weren't really. The Dutch and the Portuguese, they both were involved, but in a supporting kind of role. They went and participated in naval actions with some of their ships, but by that time their navies were not as big than the century before that, where the Dutch, for example, had a huge fleet and they defeated the British on several occasions in the Anglo-Dutch Wars, of which there were several. So that's why they also are. There's a small snippet in the book regarding Portuguese and Dutch, but they don't feature heavily within the rules. A very interesting detail on the ships, specifically the plastic ones, is the way that I've designed the sterns, as in the back plate that is attached to the ships, and the figurehead. I've insisted for these to be separate on the frame, so that for two reasons. First of all, there are three different backs on the ships and three different figureheads, so that you can interchange them to make the ships look slightly different, and therefore theme your fleet accordingly and have variety within your fleet. But on top of this has allowed me for the fleet boxes, to add on metal back sterns and figureheads with specific to a ship. Therefore, they have the name printed on them, whilst the generic ones haven't. They have no names; they're generic. So they have names printed on them, and they have the figurehead that they had at the time, to the best of our knowledge, because some of the references are quite obscure. So there has been an element of interpretation, if you want. It's not quite. They didn't really keep records of what figurehead did the Bucentaur have. Right. So there is a little bit of artistic license, if you want. But it allows you to, instead of putting the generic sterns and the generic figureheads, it allows you to have a named ship specifically for your fleet. And this is
these look gorgeous. Yeah,
they do.
Yeah.
So for example, an example I've got here in front of me is one of the French ship is the Redoutable pronunciation. I apologize for it. And it has a very specific stern, as in the cabin at the back, how it looked, with the name printed on. And it has a very specific figurehead, which is like a globe of the world held up by two little, like, people holding it on their backs. So with these small details, you can actually theme your fleet significantly and make it look unique.
That is fantastic. So the French box, for example, comes with 6 unique ships worth of fronts and backs, which
correct.
Three
frigates and 3 third rates. That instead of using the plastic backs and fronts, you substitute with the metal ones, which have all names printed at the back. So there's 6 named ships within the fleet's boxes, and this is throughout. So this is for French, British, and Spanish, and the US have 2. As I said before, they have 2 super frigates and 3 frigates, which will be named.
That is fantastic. Yes, I'm also looking at the 6 variations on the British fleet. And if you want to look at these guys, I highly recommend it. The detail's astonishing. If you go to the Warlord website and go to their store, if you look at the Royal Navy fleet or the French fleet, and you go to the pictures that go along with the descriptors, you can just scroll through and see both the back plates and the figureheads at the front, and they are absolutely astonishing. The pictures that Warlord has taken to add to these, you can zoom in on these tiny little figureheads with astonishing detail, and it looks like a hobbyist dream that you're able to paint these tiny little figureheads on the front of these 1/700 ships. It's just amazing, fantastic, mate.
Yeah, it is, and I couldn't quite remember, but I think I remember now. Just as a further example, the U.S. Frigates. So there'll be the 2 super frigates, and as I mentioned before, and the 3 frigates will be the Chesapeake, the Constellation, and the Congress.
Nice.
So you will have those 3 named ships. Specifically, the Constellation had this kind of very unique back, which kind of came out as a little bit of a bump, so it's different. Figureheads, they're mostly eagles, because yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as an American, yes.
But there's also an interpretation which we were not 100% sure if it was historically accurate, but just as a bit of variety, we've put in like an angel-shaped figureheads for you to use.
Nice.
As an alternative, but it's a 4th. So the US will have 4 different figurehead, one of which is a little bit of an artistic license, and therefore, if you feel a bit adventurous in your interpretation of history, or not have 100% accurate references, but it looks really cool because it is a very nice angel at the front of the shape. You can use that instead. And if you want to be sure of that, you want to be very accurate, then you can leave that out and use one of the other 3.
Nice. Well, let's talk about the board game, or sorry, the box game itself. So Black Seas has a core set. It's called Master and Commander. And, of course, it has the bonus-free model that a lot of Warlords games does. It's called the Sea Wolf. It is a fine gentleman with a blade strapped to his arm and a pistol pointing. But, of course, he's at 1/56 scale. But it includes 9 ships, 3 frigates, and 6 brigs. It has an A0 size board, so it gives you plenty of space to play on. And then all the gubbins that you need to play the game. You can, of course, buy the rule book separately, like you could in Cruel Seas if you wanted to buy an army box in particular, or a fleet box, I should say. But if you are looking for lots of ships, that is a good way to go as well. Now, this game it can be played on a 3x4, a 4x4, which is what the first 6 missions in the book sort of lay out. But if you want to blow out and go for some of the big naval battles, you can go larger. The rules accommodate for that, and so do some of the missions in the book, right?
Correct, yes. From mission 7 to 12 really suggest that you use a 6x4 table rather than the provided CMAT, which is actually it's like a poster. It's an A0 poster, which is roughly 3x4. So it invites you to go beyond the starter set and play on a 6x4. I have to say that the starter set I highly recommend as a first purchase, the Master and Commander starter set, because it has all the tokens in. It has the wool. Mm-hmm. It has everything that you actually need to play and to make the game look exciting and visually pleasing, on top of quite a significant amount of ships to start you off. So I'd highly recommend the starter set as your starting point because of that. I know wool is easy to come by. However, there is the fiery wool that is a mix that we have a wool company, a company that makes wool and blends different colors, and that's made bespoke for us. Mm-hmm. It's not really easy to find. No. I know you can find cotton wool quite easily. The black maybe not as easily, but still you can find it. The fiery one is not that easy to find, and that's in the starter set. And that's also part of the game, to mark that your ship is on fire, which, by the way, is great fun when ships catch fire.
Yes.
It's always a hoot. To mark them, instead of having a token, you just put a fiery wool on top of the ship, and it looks amazing because it looks as if it's on fire.
It does.
And all of this is part of the starter set box. So that's why I highly recommend going in there. It also gives you a lot of ships that maybe, if you want bigger fleet action, if you want to go for third rates and first rates, you might not want. However, it provides you a lot of ships to try the rigging, to try the painting, and then even if they're not great, they will add to your fleet and making your fleet, of significance important, and being able to play bigger games. One other point that I wanted to make was that there will be ongoing support for this game. I have already written 5 new scenarios, which are completely different and new from the ones that are in the book.
Very nice.
Some of which are small scale, some of which are a larger scale, and quite fun, I have to say. It's been fun testing them. They which will be put in the upcoming month as a free PDF to download from the website.
Nice.
Or if you join our Facebook page, they will probably be put as a link there as well. So I also encourage anybody to join our Facebook page. They can ask me directly any kind of question, or if there's any doubts, or if there's a ton of information there as well. And the community is really great. They are, self-helping, coming up with ideas, showing pictures, work in progresses, and it is really proving to be kind of a vibrant place to go and for all your naval wargaming needs, if you want.
Well, yeah, it can be a little intimidating sometimes to jump to a new scale. So having that community that you're able to interact with, especially in the digital world, is just so invaluable. To ask someone if you get stuck with something that, might be a relatively minor issue, but if you're stuck in that, it doesn't feel like a minor issue sometimes, does it? So just being able to turn to someone and say, am I doing this right? And just to see all of those wonderful work in progress photos and, people's work is just fantastic as well. There's nothing like a good Warlord community to support a game. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Gabrio. I have to say, though I do not necessarily share the passion for the sales, talking to you today has me eyeing up that box game something seriously. So I'm going to have to take a look at ordering one of those on the coming weeks, I think, because this just looks, Warlord does have a wonderful track record of putting out games that are easy to pick up, that are lots of fun to play on the tabletop. As I say, that have the depth to keep replaying. And man, I love Warlord's miniatures, but this game in particular looks fantastic on the tabletop. I think you've really outdone yourself to make it visually pop. So my hat's off to you, and I look forward to trying this soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. If you have listened to this and you have questions for Gabrio, you can contact the podcast directly, or you can contact Warlord. If you have feedback about the podcast itself, things you'd like to see, questions you might have, or if you just have some things that you wouldn't like to see. Occasionally, we do get feedback that we like to act upon and how we can make the show better. You can find me through the Facebook page for my other podcast, which is called Cast Dice, CASTDICE. If you go to that Facebook page, it is my hobby progress blog. If you message it, my name is Brad. I am the only one that answers it. And I do have to thank the many people who listen to the Warlord Cast that have messaged with great feedback and suggestions for the show. We do take those on board. We do use them. So please contact us. Let us know how we can do better. And as I've said before, look, podcasts don't cost money for you to download, but they do take time to listen to. And I would like to say for some of us, time is money, and or is more precious than money these days. So thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. We at Warlord do appreciate you taking the time to check out our products and to listen to our wonderful guests. So thank you very much. Until the next episode, I'm signing off. Thank you very much for listening. Good night.
Thank you.